Righto. Thank you, Olashe, for that introduction. Thanks to COMTO, Mr. Brad Mims, the board of directors, and the entire COMTO family for allowing me to be here today to moderate this panel. I'm going to introduce this panel now. If the panelists would start coming up to the stage, it would be most appreciated. Usually the practice, of course, in Baltimore is to trade away our all-stars. But COMTO, thankfully, has decided to bring some to Baltimore. Some are from here, as it turns out, and so you're going to be very impressed with this group of all-stars that's going to talk about transportation and our situation here in the United States and communities across the country. Let me begin first with the Federal Transit Administrator Jane Williams. Yeah. She brings over 20 years of executive experience to her role, having served previously at the Department of Energy and Department of Labor under Presidents Reagan and the Department of Interior under President George H.W. Bush. She leads an agency with more than 500 people located in Washington, D.C. and 10 regional offices across the country. She is responsible for managing an annual budget in excess of $13.5 billion. So you want to know her. She, among other things, received the COMTO National 2018 Celebrating Women Who Move the Nation Award for Outstanding Leadership in the Transportation Industry. Welcome, Administrator Williams. To my immediate right, to the left from your perspective, Maryland Department of Transportation Deputy Secretary R. Earl Lewis. R. Earl Lewis, Jr. was appointed by Maryland Transportation Secretary Pete Ron on January 20th, 2016 to serve as Deputy Secretary of Policy, Planning, and Enterprise Services for the Maryland Department of Transportation, or MDOT. It's pretty impressive, his portfolio. As Deputy Secretary, Mr. Lewis oversees the administration of MDOT offices, including diversity and equity, environment, fleet, facilities and administrative services, government affairs, human resources, minority business enterprise, small and minority business policy, planning, and capital programming, policy and regulations, real estate and economic development, and information technology. That's like 20 jobs. And he's one man, but he's a great one, and so he does it with aplomb. Thank you. Wonderful. So, to my immediate left, from your perspective to the right of the podium, Baltimore City Department of Transportation Director Michelle Porchot, Director Porchot, has a long and distinguished career in the transportation industry with more than 30 years of experience. She spent 22 years with the District of Columbia, Department of Transportation and Public Works, where she assumed increasingly responsibility-laden responsibilities, culminating in her appointment as director of the agency. Ms. Porchot went on to manage the DC Photo Enforcement Program from an operational, performance, strategic, and business development perspective. And I just want to thank her for managing that program, because I have shown up on those cameras on multiple occasions, and it's always wonderful to see myself in action. And I thank you for that. In January this year, Director Porchot also received the COMTO National 2018 Celebrating Women Who Move the Nation Award for exceptional achievements and commitment to the transportation industry. Thank you and welcome. And then last but certainly not least, President and Chief Executive Officer of APTA, Paul P. Skoutelas. Mr. Skoutelas is President and CEO of the American Public Transportation Association. His entire career has been in public transportation. Listen to this, with more than 40 years spent in both the public and private sectors. 40 years, amazing for a man who looks not a day above 70. He served as CEO He served as CEO of Public Transit Systems in Pittsburgh and Orlando, and as Senior Vice President for WSP USA, one of the world's largest architectural and engineering firms. Again, thank you for your sponsorship. Prior to WSP, Paul was the Chief Executive Officer at two prominent public transportation agencies, the Port Authority of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, and the Central Florida Regional Transportation Authority, in Orlando, Florida, and of course that is abbreviated LYNX, L-Y-N-X, and no one knows quite why. So thank you very much, again, to all the panelists for being here. They actually gave me, Olashe prepared me very well, and she actually gave me some questions to ask. And so I'll start with you, Administrator Williams, and then we'll go around. But the first question is this, which is that we know that transportation matters for economic development. By some measures, we have a shrinking middle class. by many measures, almost all measures, we have growing income inequality in this country, wealth inequality in this country. We know that in this city really was put on the map, well, obviously by the War of 1812, but also by the B&O Railroad, which by the middle part of the 19th century rendered this the second largest city in the country after only New York City. So we know that transportation and economic development go hand in hand. And so my question to you and to the other panelists is, what's next? What's next for this country? What takes us to the next level? Where are the priorities? And how do we know that those are the priorities in terms of our transportation investment in this country?
Thank you. First, let me start by saying I'm very pleased to be here with all of you today, especially the panelists here on the dais with me, especially the gentleman to my left, who was a former comrade and peer of mine at the Maryland Department of Transportation. So let me start with infrastructure. It is one of Secretary Chow's priorities for the department. And what we've tried to do is to be as creative and innovative in leveraging the federal dollar as we can be. And so we want to have more private investment and involve the private sector in those innovative financing strategies. I'll give you an example, a local one here, and when I was at MDOT, which I'm sorry Kevin Reigert had to leave, but he was also very involved in this. When the National Harbor Development Company came to us and said, we need some transit at National Harbor, I said, well, what is your transit plan? There wasn't one. There's one road in and one road out, and they needed help moving people and getting customers into those very phenomenal locations, concert hall, casino, shopping, restaurants, beautiful hotels, beautiful location. And so as we sat there, we said, well, what can you bring to the table? How can we bring value to the community and to transportation and transit in specific to make this work? And so we worked with them, and the developers of all those companies came together and actually funded a bus route that we turned into a pilot program. You know, it was part of the WMATA network that I was in charge of for Maryland. And so what we did is we were very creative about how we did it. And we started as a pilot program. Serving in a compact is kind of different because you have to make Virginia, Maryland, and DC all happy at the same time. Let me tell you, it was a tall order, but we got it done. They are paying for a portion of that bus route, 20% or $500,000 in perpetuity, just because we asked the question. So what I've been challenging transit agencies and GMs, and Paul Skatelis and I have worked a lot on this, how do we capture the value transportation, and for my focus, transit, specifically brings to communities? You heard the congressman speak about it. You heard the mayor speak about it. Transportation is about opportunity. It's about making sure people have the opportunity to get to the school they want to go to, the job they want to get, the health appointment that's very important. And so we're working very hard to leverage that investment because we recognize that infrastructure needs to be invested in, but the federal dollars are not infinite. And so we have to make them go further. And so that is the challenge I've brought to the industry. And they actually have been doing much more of that than they actually think. And so I've been very pleasantly encouraged by that development.
Thank you. And I think many people in the room would agree that the private dollar really matters in terms of funding infrastructure because the public sector doesn't have the wherewithal that it once did. I think that seems to be what the data seem to indicate. Deputy Secretary Lewis, what about you? How do you identify projects that will take us in Maryland here the next step forward? We are, of course, one of the most affluent and educated states in the country. We've got a lot going for us, but our traffic is hell. And so, how do you deal with that? And of course, we also are rife with income and wealth inequalities within and between communities. And so how do I think about that intellectually, about what's next and what programs we need to support?
As many of us know, Maryland is one of the most densely populated states in the nation. I think we rank 6th or 7th, depending on what recent survey you looked at, that congestion is a significant challenge in the state of Maryland. I'd say it's one of our greatest transportation challenges. Both the governor and the secretary have talked about the traffic release program. One of the issues that we all face in terms of congestion is that we've had a successful growing economy. That means more people, more business, more both personal vehicle and commercial vehicle truck traffic. We need to add additional capacity on all of our transportation systems, including our highways. That does not mean that we don't make significant additional investments in transit. The Purple Line is being built in Montgomery and Prince George's County. It's under construction right now. We're going to be working with Montgomery County and other counties across the state to implement future BRT routes across the state. We really need a multimodal approach. It's not just roads, it's not just transit, it's not just better land use policy, it's not just travel demand management. I represent the secretary on the Transportation Planning Board in the National Capital Region. That group took a year-long effort to study what are the big projects that we need to move forward with. That includes Metro. In terms of looking at statewide, we have to look at our rural areas and how we're allocating funding and resources to our local-oriented transit. In Baltimore, we were one of the first major urban areas that took it upon ourselves to do the challenging task to reinvent the bus system called Baltimore Link. The dedicated lanes in the middle of the city are an attempt to speed up and make those run on time so people can use them reliably in their lives. We've extended service to Sparrows Point Peninsula, where Trade Point Atlantic has been working to bring in new employers such as FedEx and Amazon and Under Armour and others to create jobs and opportunities for our citizens. That is the big focus of the large projects. We also have to look ahead at what the future may look like. How are autonomous and connected vehicles going to change the transportation network? I think we're in a period here where we're going to have tremendous changes in transportation moving forward. I know that sometimes has controversy with it, but one of the things that we do at the Maryland Department of Transportation, other transportation agencies across the country, is we have to study things. But we have to study things related to NEPA processes, so we ensure we have all the stakeholder input that we need to make sure we make good decisions in terms of what projects we move forward to. In these times where we're preparing the state of Maryland and the region for continued economic growth, and economic growth brings additional opportunities for all of our citizens.
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary. That's very much on point. What about you, Director Porchot? I'm not relegating you to talk about Baltimore City. Of course, you had the department in Baltimore City, but what about you? What do you think about the future of transportation, and how do you think about where the priority should be, legislatively or otherwise?
So the future is about better serving the people who travel. It's about connecting people to where they're going, to what they want to do. And technology is the tool that we have to embrace to provide for that connection. We don't want to be afraid in Baltimore to try new things. We want to test, we want to pilot these new forms of transportation that bring about full mobility, that bring about choice, that change the way we connect people to the places they are and where they want to go. We're embracing that in a way in the city that I think has never been done before. The city, as you mentioned, has such a rich history in this industry, in this country. And change is hard everywhere. So we're trying to embrace new ideas, new technology. We know that with technology, though, it's renewed every day. And us in the public sector have a responsibility for protecting the private dollar, protecting the public dollar. And so we're trying to test things in a way where we're being diligent about that trust, but not afraid, because we have to embrace the future. And so I think the new mobility is about better using transit, better using bikes, better providing for scooters, and also personal vehicles. But how do we use that technology to make it work comprehensively together?
I'm with you, Director Porchot, but I must say in transportation, it appears that we are stuck with some long-lived technology. So, in this city, we have a subway system. It's actually one of the busiest subway systems in the country, as it turns out. But it's not new technology. We have a light rail system, not new technology. We, of course, have widened certain lanes and so on and so forth. We have cars, we have buses, not new technology. Unlike communications, where it's a revolution, where I need to get a new account every day. The latest one is Instagram. But transportation doesn't seem to be susceptible to that, new modes. And so what technologies are we talking about in terms of expanding? Are we talking about new technologies or simply expanding traditional technologies?
So this phone is how we decide what we're going to do all the time, every day. And some of the apps that are on these phones are what helps us better use what we have, helps us make these important choices. But we have to have good information to make those choices. So we really want to look at how we better utilize that kind of technology. I had summer youth in my office this summer, and they showed me how to use the transit app. They downloaded it for me. We had wonderful conversations about which line. I'm the yellow line on the link, by the way. But guess what was not there on that screen when I saw the best way to get from A to B? The cost. And cost is what unifies us all. I feel like I got a big charge today from the congressman and the mayor because just like what they say, I'm the transportation director for everyone in Baltimore City. And so the cost of moving around this city, of choosing the way to go, of finding the fastest way in an emergency, is an important part of expanding the technology and having it help us move the people around.
Very good. And then now the youthful Mr. Soutelis, CEO of the American Public Transportation Association. Hope I got that right. But tell us, what do you think? You have a very broad view of these things, a long-lived view of these things. You have tremendous perspective on these things. Tell this audience what the future is going to bring, where the best ideas are.
Well, thank you. First, let me just say how pleased I am to be part of the panel today. And I got to give a shout out to my good friend and longtime colleague, Brad Mims, who's doing a great job at COMTO. And I will say that APTA and COMTO enjoy a great relationship that we're continuing to strengthen. First of all, let me say we're at a transformative time in our industry and transportation. There's no doubt about it for the reasons just mentioned. Technology is allowing us, enabling us to do things that we couldn't do just a few short years ago. But let me begin by understanding how important transportation of all modes is for our country. It really is the bedrock for economic development and prosperity for our citizens. Public transportation, which is what I'm concerned about every single day, is at the forefront of that. There's no better way to create opportunity for our citizens, for people who need to access to jobs, to access new opportunities in terms of jobs, and to get to all the life's activities. Public transportation literally connects people to life's activities. Congressman Cummings said it so eloquently just a few moments ago. So our job, and I think our challenge, is to continue to argue, to make compelling cases for added new investment in public transportation. You only have to go around to other cities in the country, not only to here in Baltimore and to D.C., to see what is happening and how investment in public transportation literally is transforming economies. We were in Denver just last month for our APTA Rail Conference. Denver is a showpiece in terms of the local community stepping up, making funding and financing decisions. They're expanding commuter rail, light rail, bus rapid transit. They're building and have built a tremendous new intermodal facility, Union Station, that's been revived, that's creating new business opportunities. Those are the things that we can talk about, but better yet, see firsthand and tell ourselves it can happen. I just came back from a week-long study mission in Canada that I led along with our APTA chair, Nat Ford, and we went to Montreal, we went to Ottawa, we went to Toronto, we went to Vancouver. Very, very different cities, and it's Canada. But one thing they've got in common, they're making enormous investments in public transportation. Why? They understand what we understand, that connecting people to those activities, creating opportunities for growth and investment, creating opportunities for their citizens to live productive lives is what it's about. And that's what our argument is here. We want to see greater investment, federal, state, and local. That's been a great partnership that has endured for public transit. That's what we're arguing for every day, and we'll continue to do so because the facts are compelling. Public transportation makes a huge difference in people's lives.
I'm with you, Mr. Soutelis. You're absolutely correct. But aren't we really doomed in certain ways? I know you said Denver is an example of a city, an American city that can do it. And there are all kinds of Canadian cities, Toronto, Vancouver, so on and so forth, Calgary, that also do it. They get it. But we are in a nation with a $21 trillion national debt. We're in a nation that the next fiscal year, federal fiscal year, which begins October 1st, will run a more than $1 trillion budget deficit for the year. We are swamped by expenditures in Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, so on and so forth. Birth rates in America have not been this low for quite some time, actually not in recorded history. The number of births actually has been declining since 2008. Immigration policy is in flux. There are 6.6 million available unfilled jobs in this country right now because we can't find workers, or at least maybe we're not looking in the right places. But the unemployment rate is roughly at an 18-year low. It's true. So where are the resources going to come from? We already have amassed a $21 trillion national debt without properly investing in our infrastructure. And now we're behind the 8 ball financially, and we're getting older as a society.
Sure. And my answer to that is it's about priority setting and leadership. We've got to set our priorities straight. The federal gas tax has not been increased since 1993. It has 40% of the purchasing power. Look at communities across the country. They're taxing themselves either in the form of gas taxes or sales taxes. There are many, many ways that we can address that. And we've got the challenge ahead in just 2 years. The Highway Trust Fund is going to be insolvent, and we need to address that. But we are a wealthy country. If we set our priorities straight, if we have the right leadership, we can address these issues. We can't solve every problem, but we have to understand that transportation is so fundamental to what we do. We can do it if we have the right champions and the right leadership.
And Administrator Williams, same question to you, which is, we really are behind a financial 8 ball. And I understand the private sector has oodles, trillions of dollars of capital looking to be invested. I understand that. But it strikes me that the private sector has a different set of priorities from the public sector. One is profit maximization and not necessarily so much focus on broadening opportunities across communities. So how do we deal with this? Should we raise the federal gas tax? What should we do?
To Paul's point, obviously through reauthorization, we will be looking at the tax and whether or not that should be a recommendation that we would make. But also to Paul's point, Denver Union Station, I would say that is somewhere to look to when you look at projects that really have worked. They have developed 7.73 million square feet of new development. And this was around a very bad area which had economic plight. It was underdeveloped. No one wanted to be there. And they took this old train station and turned it into a really beautiful place to be. And as a result, they used Tiger money. They used through FTA and the U.S. Department of Transportation. They paid back their loan in record time. They expect to generate over $31 million in tax revenue simply because of the way they developed that property. And so it's multimodal, so people want to be there. They connect bus, commuter rail, light rail. They can go out to the airport. I actually rode the line out to the A line out to the airport. And it's really where I try to point people to look for that value capture. And I think that's how you attract private investment. The developers that invested in that property got a return on their investment in a very quick turnaround time. I'd also say we're trying to get, with the one federal decision, projects on the books quicker and completed faster. So one of the things the president has agreed to is that he's put forward in the one federal decision that it will take 2 years to do NEPA, it's not forever, and it's not from one agency to the next. There'll be one agency that owns that decision, and they will manage all of the other federal agencies that decision needs to go through. And so the goal is to bring that in within 2 years. I personally think that will spur a lot of private investment interest in transit and transportation development.
Thank you. Deputy Secretary Lewis, would you agree with the proposition that private capital is key to dealing with future infrastructure funding requirements?
Yes, I would agree with that.
And would you agree with the statement that Maryland is a leader in forging public-private partnerships to help finance transportation infrastructure?
I think we are one of the leaders. We have experience prior to the traffic relief plan, which is a $9 billion public-private partnership, which base proposals add express toll lanes on 495 and I-270, and we're going to be vetting that against 15 alternatives as part of the NEPA process. but MDOT is basically, compared to a lot of states, we're blessed. We have a $15 billion 6-year capital program, but that still isn't enough to deal with all of our priorities. We've had experience with P3s in the past, not just the Purple Line, which is a $5.6 billion P3 project, but the Maryland Port Administration has a P3 with the Ports of America Chesapeake at the Seagirt Marine Terminal in terms of operation. With Arias, MDTA, redid and is operating the rest stops on I-95 called the Chesapeake House and the Maryland House. So it's not our first time at the rodeo. We believe we know how to do this, and we're going to execute the plans to deliver the infrastructure that Maryland needs despite the limitations on our own state budget.
And terrific. And you mentioned the port. And, this panel is ostensibly about multimodal transportation. Let's talk about the port, one of our great success stories, one of the sources of pride,
yes.
Right? Orioles can't win. The port wins every day. But one of the frustrations I have had, and many business people have had, is that we do not have or support double stacking of cargo on our railroads because of the Howard Street Tunnel and other impediments. Do you think that we as Marylanders wait too much for the federal dollars to flow here instead of going ahead and doing important infrastructure projects? Because that's what we're waiting for, right? Federal money?
Actually, that's not the whole story with the Howard Street Tunnel. The primary issue that has held up development was a change in management at the top of CSX that prevented us from moving forward with that project. Now, there's new management at CSX.
That's right, because the CEO died.
And we are in discussions with them to get that project back on track. But that is a critical long-term project for the success of the port, which is an economic engine. The port generates 13,650 direct jobs. Another 127,000 jobs in Maryland are linked to port activities. If you've been following the news, it continues to set new records in economic benefit to the state and traffic and containers and other shipments, including autos and Ro-Ro, which we are #1 in the country. But in order to sustain that, we're buying additional property, and we're planning for the future and double stack to move more freight other than roadway is key to the long-term success of the port. And we look way in advance to position Maryland to be where it needs to be to provide opportunities for our citizens. And it's good that the theme that you've heard from several of the panelists here is, linking citizens to opportunities. That's actually part of MDOT's mission statement under Pete Ron. We connect people to life's opportunities, and transportation is vital, similar to what the congressman just talked about.
Yeah, and I would argue that the public-private partnership at the Port of Baltimore is one of the most successful public-private partnerships in the history of this country. Recapitalize the entire port largely with private dollars and position the port to deal with the implications of the widening of the Panama Canal. It's really been a success story. And we, not just investors, but we, the entire community, have benefited from that.
Correct. And the other little story there related to the environmental aspects of it, the Seagirt Marine Terminal actually was a result of the dredge material that came during the construction of the Fort McHenry Tunnel that went into operation in 1985. So that whole project was a big win-win for the state and the region.
I agree with that. And what about the city? And thinking about public-private partnerships in a Baltimore City context, one of the largest cities in the country, enormous infrastructure needs, of course, but enormous promise, wonderful location, all those kinds of things. Millennials moving here by, in droves and so on and so forth. So talk about that, if you don't mind.
We recently opened the Central Avenue Bridge, a new connection from the east side of Baltimore to the harbor. And what's so important about that is that Baltimore is changing. It's becoming a residential-friendly, mixed-use downtown, and industry is moving away and growing. But a lot of our industrial areas are becoming mixed-use development. And so we've got to provide transportation that better connects those new places. Opening that bridge created the second link to a part of the city that previously was a peninsula with only one way in and out, which was fine when it was all industrial. But today, that link provides for bicycle connection, pedestrian connection, connects restaurants, industry, offices, a huge national location for the telemarketing industry. And so what we're doing in Baltimore is listening to not only the transportation community, we're listening to the development community, we're listening to our private partners, we're listening to those who provide Uber, Lyft, you know, the new forms of transportation that are private, and we're providing for the new economy.
And Director Purcell, Olashea gave me a series of questions to ask, and so I take a risk if I, deviate from, it's okay, well, you say that, but wait till this question comes. So, Director Purcell.
No questions off script. I'm just
No. I will say, you talked about technology, and you talk about public-private partnerships and so on and so forth, and moving people around, right on point. There is, and I know that this audience comes from across the nation, and it's not just about Baltimore, but let me ask a question about Baltimore. There has been some issue recently about the timing of the street lights. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Where are we on that? Where are we on that?
So the thing is, as much as we want new items, we've got to take care of our old infrastructure as well. And so some of our older cities that were built strong for the way we moved, I haven't found that there's been a transportation plan, a comprehensive multimodal transportation plan prepared for Baltimore City, but boy, was this city built in a beautiful way. It's a beautiful grid. It's got great transportation on that grid, but it's old. It's very old. And it's going to take a lot of money to fix all our bridges, to fix all our roads, and to fix our traffic signal system. And so we're investing in that system unlike ever before. And we're also going through this change. So with the way that travel occurs now with these changing land uses means that we've got to make the infrastructure we have adhere to those new uses. So we've been working with our old system to try to make it right, to make it as best as possible. What I talk about is safety, first and foremost. And the signal system is what provides for that safety. And so the communities here look for, more proposals coming out of on the street from Baltimore City, because we're renewing our infrastructure and we're working with the state and the feds to make sure that we get all the resources we need to make this city work.
That's a wonderful answer. I will say that as a person who drives throughout downtown a lot, that the street lights, the system does promote safety in part because no one's moving. And so that really does limit crashes very nicely. Now you just heard from, and you want to follow up, you just heard from the city of Baltimore that they need money. So what does the state have to say about that? And also make your other comment.
Well, first of all, I'd like to give Michelle and the city DOT great credit in working with the state as part of the Baltimore Link project. Related to signals, we work to have some initial corridors where we prioritize bus traffic moving through those intersections. As we move forward, we're going to be looking at additional corridors that we can work with the city and partner to deliver better public transportation service to all the citizens of Baltimore. Across the state, we're also looking at signal coordination. I believe there were 7 to 9 corridors that the governor announced a few months ago that we're focusing on having similar coordination of traffic lights. One that's operational right now, which I happen to live in Harford County, is along Route 24 in Abington and Bel Air, so that when you start at the end, the lights turn as you move up, green or red, to move traffic more efficiently rather than stopping every couple hundred yards, which is obviously something that's very annoying. Right. And we're looking at issues like that where we can deploy technology, working with our local, county, and municipal partners throughout the state to implement technology which makes our highway system move more efficiently. Now, in terms of funding, We have dialogue with every major jurisdiction in the state. The MACO conference is coming up in about 3 weeks. I know we'll be sitting down with Michelle and her team and Secretary Ron and myself and other MDOT officials to talk through the important priorities and how we can figure out how we can get things done.
Wonderful, thank you. And Mr. Soutelis, take us out. Tell us, you said that it comes down to leadership and prioritization. I mean, I don't know, you look at the recent history here, transportation does not seem to have been the priority in many, many places. What do you think is going to change, or do you think it's going to change? And multimodal transportation will become more of a priority in this country, given all the other challenges we have.
Well, I think there's two things that come quickly to mind. One, Michelle touched on, that is this issue of what we call state of good repair. We have so many bridges and infrastructure in the U.S., and I'm talking public transportation in particular, not only the WMATA system, but here in Baltimore and New York and other places. That system needs to be replenished, and it carries millions of riders every day. We need to do something there. Secondly, our cities and our urban areas are growing. They want to grow to accommodate the additional population that's coming our way. You can only do that through expanding our network. And so I think those are the two things that we've got to keep in mind as we continue to make the case.
Hey, would you thank the panelists for doing a spectacular job, because they did a spectacular job. Thank you very much to all of you, Administrator Williams, Deputy Secretary Lewis, Director Michelle Parchow, and of course, Mr. Soutelis from APTA. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege to be with you today. And now I give way, I believe, to the Deputy Secretary. I believe you make some remarks, and then we'll give way to Mr. Mims.
Thank you, thank you. I know you worked in the past with my late uncle, Dunbar Brooks, who was with BMC.
Did.
Yes,
I was very fond of Dunbar Brooks.
And you always
very
respond to me, too.
Good. Oh, thank you.
Thanks. All right, well, thank you all, especially Brad Mims, Warren Montague, Mayor Pugh, Congressman Cummings, and our esteemed colleagues, Jane Williams, Michelle Perceau, and Paul Skoutelis, for engaging in this important discussion. I'd also like to thank our moderator, Anabam Basu, for ensuring that we had a lively discussion, and he didn't exactly stick to the questions, which was actually good. Also, I'm very pleased on behalf of Governor Larry Hogan, Secretary Pete Ron, who was with us this morning, to represent the Maryland Department of Transportation in support of COMTO. MDOT remains committed to the ideals and values of COMTO. We believe it's important to advocate for minority inclusion in all aspects of transportation. A big part of that is making sure we continue to have these dialogues, share ideas, sometimes very difficult challenges. We face together better if we work together. It's critical that we provide opportunities for minority advancement and advocate for training and professional development for minorities and women as part of the folks that have the ideas that are going to take us into the future. I'm confident that COMTO and its members have and will continue to play a great part in this effort. I know that the first COMTO National Conference was held in Baltimore over 20 years ago. I am sure you can tell the progress we have made since then, and I think our story has just begun to be written. So thank you all for being here today. It's appreciated.